These blades do not dull, they do not break, and they outlive the men who wield them. Across the world of Westeros, where kingdoms rise and fall like tides, there are relics that refuse to fade into history. Among them, none are more feared, or more coveted, than the weapons forged from Valyrian steel. They are impossibly sharp, unnaturally light, and marked with patterns no smith has ever been able to truly replicate. Passed from one noble house to another, these blades are not just weapons, they are symbols of power, legacy, and something far older. But there is one problem. No one alive knows how to make them. The secret was lost with the fall of Valyria, a civilization so advanced, so dangerous, that even its ruins are whispered about with dread. And yet, the steel remains. So what exactly was it? A forgotten craft, perfected by mastersmiths? A rare combination of metals, born in the fires of volcanic lands? Or something far more disturbing? There are three theories that attempt to explain the mystery of Valyrian steel. The first speaks of skill, the second, of science, and the third suggests that these blades were never just forged. They were created. To understand the mystery of Valyrian steel, you first have to understand why it matters. These are not just rare weapons. They are, in many ways, impossible ones. A Valyrian steel blade is lighter than it should be, yet stronger than any common sword. It holds an edge so sharp that it can cut through armor, bone, and flesh with unsettling ease. And unlike ordinary steel, that edge does not fade with time. Years pass, decades, even centuries, and still, the blade remains as deadly as the day it was forged. There is no need for sharpening, no visible decay, no weakness that can be exploited. It is as if the metal itself resists change. And then there are the patterns. Every Valyrian steel weapon carries faint ripples across its surface, dark, flowing lines that seem almost organic. They are not decoration. They are not etched or carved. They are part of the blade itself, woven into its structure in a way no modern smith has been able to replicate. Even the greatest craftsmen of Westeros can only rework what already exists. They can melt down a Valyrian blade, reforge it, reshape it, divide one weapon into several. But they cannot create new Valyrian steel. Not from raw materials, not from scratch, not anymore. And that changes everything. Because in a world where knowledge is passed from master to apprentice, where skills survive through generations, true techniques do not simply vanish. They evolve, they degrade, perhaps, but they do not disappear entirely. Yet this one did. When Valyria fell, when its cities were consumed and its people scattered, the secret of this steel vanished with it. Not partially lost, not fragmented, gone. What remains are relics. Blades carried by ancient houses, each with its own name, its own history, its own weight of legacy. These weapons are not traded lightly. Some are kept for generations without ever being drawn. Others are lost in war, only to be rediscovered decades later, their edges as perfect as ever. They do not age like normal objects. They endure, which raises a question that no one in Westeros has been able to answer. If Valyrian steel is simply the result of extraordinary craftsmanship, why has no one been able to recreate it? If it is only a matter of rare materials, why can those materials not be found again? And if it is just metal, why does it behave as though it is something more? The most widely accepted explanation is also the simplest one. Valyrian steel, according to this view, was never magic. It was mastery. Long before its destruction, Valyria was not just an empire of dragonlords. It was a civilization built on knowledge, discipline, and control. Its influence stretched across continents, its roads and cities unmatched, its power sustained not only by dragons, but by what it could create. And at the heart of that creation stood its craftsmen. Valyrian smiths were said to be unlike any others in the known world. They worked in conditions no ordinary forge could sustain, near volcanic heat, in environments where lesser metals would fail before they were even shaped. Their techniques were guarded, refined, and passed down through generations, each master adding something new, something precise, something almost impossible to replicate without direct instruction. To them, steel was not just material, it was a discipline. The process of forging a blade was slow, deliberate, and exact. Every fold of the metal, every strike of the hammer, every moment in the fire was controlled with intent. Temperature, timing, pressure, nothing was left to chance. Over time, this created a level of consistency and quality that no other culture could match. In this interpretation, the patterns found in Valyrian steel are not mysterious at all. They are the natural result of advanced forging techniques, layering, folding, and refining the metal until its internal structure becomes both incredibly strong and uniquely patterned. The same principle can be seen, in simpler forms, in other legendary steels across history. The difference is that Valyria perfected it, not through magic, but through repetition, secrecy, and time. Knowledge was never written openly. It was taught, protected, restricted to those deemed worthy. Entire bloodlines may have been dedicated to preserving specific parts of the process. One family mastering the preparation of the metal, another controlling the heat, another responsible for the final shaping. To outsiders, this would have appeared indistinguishable from sorcery. But it was not sorcery. It was control. And then, in a single moment, it was gone. The Doom of Valyria did not simply destroy cities. It erased systems. It shattered lineages. It killed not only the masters, but the apprentices who would have carried their knowledge forward. Whatever secrets existed were never recorded in a way that could survive the fall. So when the world tried to rebuild, it had nothing to begin with. What remained were fragments, stories of how it might have been done, imitations of techniques that once worked, and the steel itself, silent, perfect, and impossible to replicate. From this perspective, the mystery of Valyrian steel is not supernatural at all. It is a historical loss, a broken chain of knowledge that can never be restored because too many links are missing. And there is a certain logic to that. History has seen technologies vanish before, methods forgotten, materials lost, techniques that no longer make sense without the context in which they were created. Entire crafts have disappeared when the conditions that supported them collapsed. Valyria, after all, was not just a place. It was an ecosystem of power, resources, and expertise. Remove that ecosystem, and the result disappears with it. Which would explain everything. The rarity, the consistency, the impossibility of recreating it. But there is one problem this explanation cannot escape. If Valyrian steel is nothing more than the product of extraordinary skill, why does even its reforging require something more than skill alone? If the first explanation relies on history, the second turns to something far more concrete. Not lost knowledge, but lost materials. According to this theory, Valyrian steel was never truly mysterious. Its properties, its strength, its sharpness, its resilience, can all be explained through advanced metallurgy. What made it special was not magic, but a precise combination of elements, conditions, and technique that no longer exists in the same form. And it begins with Valyria itself. The lands of the Valyrian Freehold were shaped by fire. Vast volcanic chains, deep mineral veins, and constant geothermal activity created an environment unlike anywhere else in the known world. Beneath its surface lay ores enriched with rare elements, metals that, when combined in the right proportions, could produce extraordinary results. Among these elements, one stands out in many interpretations: vanadium. In small amounts, vanadium can dramatically increase the strength and durability of steel. It refines the internal grain, improves resistance to wear, and allows the metal to hold a sharper edge for longer periods of time. Modern metallurgy recognizes its value, but in Valyria, it may have existed naturally within the ore itself, waiting to be unlocked. But raw material alone is not enough. The process matters. Valyrian forges, according to this view, operated at temperatures far beyond what traditional methods could achieve. Whether through volcanic heat or more advanced furnace design, these extreme conditions allowed the metal to be purified and structured at a level that ordinary smithing simply cannot reach. Layering, folding, and repeated refinement would then produce the distinctive patterns seen in Valyrian blades. Patterns not as decoration, but as a visible trace of the metal's internal architecture. Similar effects can be observed in historical steels, though never with the same consistency or quality. In this framework, everything begins to make sense. The strength of the steel comes from its composition. The sharpness, from its refined structure. The patterns, from the forging process itself. Even the rarity can be explained. If the specific ore deposits of Valyria were destroyed, buried, or simply inaccessible after the Doom, then the key ingredient would be gone. Without it, no amount of skill could recreate the original material. Smiths could imitate the process, but never achieve the same result. What appears to be magic is simply the absence of the right conditions. And for a moment, this explanation feels complete. It is grounded, logical, reassuring. It brings the mystery back into the realm of understanding. But only for a moment. Because there are details that refuse to fit. Valyrian steel does not just hold an edge, it seems to resist degradation entirely. Blades centuries old show no meaningful loss of function, no structural fatigue that would normally appear over time. Even the finest real-world alloys, no matter how advanced, are still subject to wear, corrosion, and eventual failure. This steel is not. And then there is the matter of reforging. If Valyrian steel is simply a superior alloy, then reshaping it should be a matter of technique and temperature. Difficult, perhaps, but not impossible. And yet, in practice, reforging these blades is treated as something far more complex. It is rare, unpredictable, and often accompanied by practices that go beyond standard craftsmanship, almost ritualistic, which raises a deeper question. If the secret of Valyrian steel lies only in its materials, why does working with it seem to require something more than material science alone? At that point, the scientific explanation begins to lose its certainty. Because while it can explain how the steel might have been made, it struggles to explain what it became. There is a third explanation. It is not taught, not written, and rarely spoken of without hesitation. Because it does not describe a craft or a material. It describes a transformation. In this interpretation, Valyrian steel was never simply forged. It was created through a process that combined fire, blood, and intent. To understand it, you have to look again at Valyria, not as a civilization of craftsmen, but as one built on control over forces others feared to touch. Dragons were not symbols, they were tools, extensions of power, shaped and directed with precision. And their fire was not ordinary flame. Dragonfire, as it is often described, burns hotter than any forge, capable of melting stone and steel alike. But within this theory, its role goes beyond heat. It is not just a source of temperature, it is the first stage of transformation. The destruction of the original form. In an ordinary forge, metal is softened, shaped, and refined. Its structure changes, but its nature remains the same. It is still metal, bound by the same limitations, the same physical rules. But dragonfire does something different. It breaks those limits. Under such extreme conditions, the internal structure of the metal would not simply be altered, it would be erased. Whatever impurities, inconsistencies, or weaknesses existed would be burned away completely, leaving behind something closer to a blank state than a finished material. Not perfected, emptied. And that emptiness is the key. Because what follows is not forging in the traditional sense. It is imposition. The second stage, according to this theory, is where the process becomes something else entirely. Blood, not as a coolant, not as a symbolic gesture, but as a medium. In the world shaped by Valyria, blood is not inert. It carries meaning, identity, power. Rituals built around it are not superstition. They are methods of transferring something intangible into the physical world. If that principle holds, then introducing blood at the moment when the metal has been stripped of its original structure would do more than cool it. It would define it. The blade would not simply harden. It would take on a new internal order. One not dictated purely by physics, but by whatever force the blood represents. In most interpretations, this is where dragon blood becomes essential. Dragons are not natural creatures. They are bound to magic, to the legacy of Valyria itself. Their blood, therefore, would carry an intensity far beyond that of any ordinary being. Using it in such a process would not just strengthen the metal, it would imprint it with something that resists decay, resists entropy, resists time. Which begins to explain the impossible. Why these blades do not dull, why they do not weaken, why they seem to endure without degradation. Not because they are indestructible, but because they were never allowed to follow the normal rules of matter in the first place. And then there are the patterns. In this theory, the ripples in Valyrian steel are not the result of folding or layering. They are the visible trace of the moment when something foreign was bound into the metal, an echo of the process itself, frozen into the blade. Not decoration, memory, but there is a complication. Dragon blood is rare. Even at the height of Valyria's power, dragons were valuable beyond measure. Using their blood in large quantities for every forged weapon would have been inefficient, even wasteful. And yet, Valyrian steel, while rare, was not singular. Multiple blades existed, enough to arm houses, to be passed down, to be lost and found across generations. Which suggests one of two possibilities. Either the process required only a small amount of dragon blood, or something else was used to complete it. This is where the theory becomes darker. Because if blood is the medium, if it is what defines the final structure of the blade, then the source of that blood may not have been limited to dragons alone. Valyria was not known for restraint. It was known for dominance. Control over dragons implies control over something greater, the willingness to use living things as tools, to shape not only metal, but life itself, for the sake of power. In such a system, the line between material and sacrifice becomes difficult to define. And if human blood, under the right conditions, within the right ritual, could serve as a substitute or enhancement, then the cost of creating such a blade would not be measured in effort, but in lives. This would explain what the other theories cannot: why the knowledge was not preserved, why it was not written down, why it vanished so completely with the fall of Valyria. Some knowledge is lost by accident, other knowledge is buried on purpose, because it is not meant to survive. And perhaps Valyrian steel falls into that second category, a creation so effective, so precise, that it could not exist without a cost the world was not meant to remember. Which leaves one final possibility: that these blades endure not because they are perfectly made, but because something within them was never meant to fade. And if that is true, then every Valyrian sword still carries a fragment of the moment it was created. A moment of fire, of blood, and of something that was bound, and never released. Three explanations. 3 ways to understand the same impossible material. The first speaks of craftsmanship, lost techniques, broken lineages, a civilization that took its secrets to the grave. The second speaks of nature, rare ores, extreme conditions, and metallurgy pushed beyond what the modern world can recreate. And the third speaks of something else entirely: fire, blood, and intention. Each theory tries to pull Valyrian steel back into the realm of understanding, to make it familiar, reproducible, safe.
But the truth is that none of them fully fit, because Valyrian steel is not just defined by how it was made. It is defined by what it became after it was made. A material that resists time, a blade that outlives dynasties, and relic that refuse to behave like anything else in the known world. Perhaps the secret was never a single method. Perhaps it was a combination of all three: skills, science, and something far more dangerous than either. Or perhaps the secret was never meant to be understood in the first place. And that is why it survives, not as knowledge, but as mystery, covered into a metal that refuses to forget its origin.